Today we're going to do a book review. Recently I read Things I Wish I Knew by Rachelle Dené Poth. The book is laid out just to give everybody an idea of how it works. There's about 50 vignettes or stories from various stakeholders in education. The first group is called Things I Wish I Knew, where Rachelle talks about when she started teaching, relationships, challenging yourself to keep learning. Then there's a section about administrators, another section about students, and another section about what she wishes others knew about education. And I think it's great to see her insight after 25 plus years of teaching and her experience to bring to this, because one of my favorite things is the idea that you're getting to see these perspectives from different people. Normally, when I talk about connections, I'm thinking about connections between like science and technology and engineering and art and social studies and math and communication and how everything's related. But I really like this focus on connecting with people because I think it helps us build empathy, which is something we really need to teach our students. One of the other things about it is because it has all these vignettes, they typically are only about 3 pages each. So it's very easy to read, even during a school year when you can be extremely busy. I think it's important every day to just take 10 to 15 minutes to read and 10 to 15 minutes to reflect. And if you can get through 2 or 3 vignettes or these little stories in that time, and take some time to reflect on your day and what you want to be and who you want to keep aspiring to be as teachers, I think it's great motivation moving forward. So with that, we're very excited that I was actually able to get Rachelle to meet and talk a little bit about this book with us. And so for starters, as I mentioned, I always think of the connections more disciplinary, but you were connecting people, and I'm just curious, where did this idea come from?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have always been the type of person that I enjoy talking to people. And years ago, I mean, being in the classroom, but years ago, I worked as a server in a restaurant, and I loved those different opportunities every day, just to hear people's stories, to learn from them, get different perspectives. And then when it came to, like being in the classroom, same thing with my students or with my colleagues or connecting on social media, you learn so much from other people, even if it's just like a very quick conversation. And I often would find, like when I started to do some writing and things, that like people were kind of hesitant, and I was hesitant too, to share my own story. Like I'm like, oh, I'm struggling with something, but I don't want to tell anybody because that would show that I'm vulnerable. People would think less of me. I'm a teacher, I'm supposed to know everything, right? But then I realized, like, no, we have to share our stories. And I was finding that there were people who were coming to me and asking, for some help, which was awesome. And then I said, well, don't just take my opinion or my answer, go speak to somebody else. And they said, no, I don't really want to do that. And I had encouraged some people to start writing a blog, even if they didn't share it with anybody, or just using like voice texting and so forth. But what I found is, just even when I wrote my first book, the first couple of books, I was gathering stories from people. And I mean, I was just amazed at just reading them, like the impact that they had on me, just short stories, short vignettes, or longer stories, like that were chapters. And I just really loved sharing other people's stories. I mean, mine are in my books too, but just putting somebody else's information out there. Like, we all have different experiences, but we can learn so much from each other. And that's just something that keeps me going. I'm always fascinated by everybody else's experiences. And sometimes you just need that kind of nudge from somebody to tell your story. And it makes all of the difference, that you may not even realize the difference that it makes in somebody's life.
It kind of reminds me of in Ted Lasso when he says, be curious and not judgmental. And
Right.
I think if we're all a little bit more curious, we can learn from other people so much more. And I think continuing to learn and continuing to grow is just so important, because I think there's an old saying that goes, did you teach 30 years or did you teach 1 year 30 times?
Right.
And there are some teachers that do that because they don't grow. And I think growth mindset and being curious is something, we hopefully can impart on our students. And I think even your kind of trajectory of your career is inspiring, because it's only been like the last 4 or so years that you wrote these 7 books, and I know you're working on some more. And to think, you can go so long. I mean, maybe you didn't because you blogged and everything, but I know for me, I might go, oh, I'm not a writer, but it's important to think I'm not a writer yet. So how did you end up kind of becoming such a prolific writer and doing that transition? You started small with blogs, you went to books. Is there any other secrets you'd like to share to help people grow in that area?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny when I started to blog, because I didn't really know what a blog was. I had read blogs. I didn't know where the word came from initially. And I was like, oh, this sounds kind of cool. Maybe I'll do this. But what would I write about? And I remember reaching out to a tech company because I was doing conference sessions and just talking about things that, I would go to a conference session, talk about things we were using in my classroom. And I always liked on the back of my computer, I had tons of stickers and I like to share the brand. And so people would be curious about like, oh, what's that for? And one of the companies was SurveyMonkey. And I had been using that for like a quick quiz or just for, to get feedback from my students to help me to reflect on my practices. And I remember sending an email to them and said, hey, could you send some stickers or something? I'd love to give them out to my students. And that was like one of the first blogs I had written. And when they first asked me to write like, oh, this is interesting, you're writing blog or you're not writing blogs, you're using SurveyMonkey in your classroom. Would you write a blog about it? And I think they gave me a word count of like 500 or 600 words. And that seemed like that was just like so long to write. So I did that one, but then I kind of liked writing. I'm like, oh, this really wasn't that difficult. I just wrote about what I did and how the kids responded to it. And so then after that, I started to write for Teach Thought because you can submit on a lot of these platforms and they may or may not publish your story. But I just thought about things I was doing in my classroom that might be interesting to somebody else, even if only a few people read it. But it was good for me because it was a way for me to reflect on what I was doing. And then I could go back and think, gee, that was really not the best idea. Or why didn't I think of that sooner? And I really enjoyed it. So that's where I started. And somebody had suggested to me that I should write a book. And again, I said, like, what am I going to write this book about? And they said, just your experiences, what you've done over this time. And I will say that my best hack, and somebody had busted me doing this at a conference, is the voice to text. And I've been doing that for probably 8 years now, at least, for a lot of the things. I'll go for a walk, focus on self-care, and I might have something on my mind, and I just open up a Google document or something where I can capture the text. I just walk and talk. And then when I come back, there were times where I had 2,000 words, which was amazing. And were they perfect? No, because I had to go back and I had to think what sounded like these weird words that appeared in the text. But it really was a time saver. And then it gave me a chance to kind of go back and reflect. And I actually have shared that with my students who wrote a couple vignettes in some of my books too. And they said, like, that's an amazing way to do it because it removes the pressure of like sitting down and like typing and writing something out. Like if you're just thinking out loud, you can always go back and fix it. So that's kind of like how I segued into writing the books.
It's amazing how just doing a little bit at a time can really make something that's might seem insurmountable, doable after a while. So you have 7 books done. I think you might have some more on the horizon, which we'll let you talk about in a little bit. I'm going to get another one of your books and read it. And I'm just kind of curious, what would you recommend? I know you don't know me very well, but what is one of your favorites, or what do you think might be one of my favorites, so that I can go out and read it and keep my professional growth going?
Yeah, well, what's kind of funny about most of my books is like you really don't need to read them from cover to cover like most books, because you can just find something that's interesting, a topic, a focus area, and just dive in. Like you said before, there's short vignettes, short stories. But my first book is definitely a favorite because it was the first one, and it came about because I was looking at some of my notes from books I had read. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I've written down so many quotes. I wonder if I could write a book about quotes that help us to think about education differently.
Mm.
And so that one ended up being, there are some chapters that are guest chapters. There are vignettes sprinkled throughout. 2 of my students co-wrote a chapter. So I love that one just because it's the first. But honestly, if I were to recommend a book, besides the Things book that you read, I love the book True Story, Lessons That One Kid Taught Us, because I started to make a list of these lessons over the years that I had learned from kids. Some of them were, those very frustrating kind of, we all had these experiences with kids where you're just like, oh my gosh, I didn't handle that well, or that was a really bad experience, or this was the best experience in building those relationships. And so I just kept a running list of things. And I thought, what's the lesson I learned? And I wonder how many other educators have learned things from students, and you don't really realize like how that has impacted your practice as a professional. So I put messages out there on Twitter, and I said, I'm writing these books about, lessons that we may have learned from kids. And I like that one because one, it, has all of these different stories about students in it. And it's under my theme of Thrive, which is my LLC. It's like Thrive and EDU. And those letters stand for something. And that's tenacity, honesty, relatability, integrity, vulnerability, and empathy. And I think those are all, things that as educators we need to focus on, but I think those are things we need to model for our students. And you mentioned empathy before as well. And so the book is not divided into chapters, it's aligned with those themes. And so I like that. It was a little tricky with 37 other people trying to figure out, reading their stories, but reading their stories and like learning from them was so powerful. And then trying to figure out, where do they align? A lot of them fit into all of those categories, but where did it fit the best? And so I would recommend that one because there are some really, really good stories in it from people, from educators from all around the world.
And I think, what you shared earlier too is so important that, we're learning from each other's mistakes, but we can only do that if we're vulnerable. And sometimes vulnerability is seen as a sign of weakness when really it's just so important to personal and professional growth. Well,
Absolutely.
thanks so much for your time. I know there's other ways people can engage with you. If you want to share some of those, there's a Monday night chat. If you want to talk a little bit about that and any other things, directions you'd like me to point people towards, I'd be
Yeah.
happy to share that. So thank you for your time, and I'll let you finish up.
All right. Well, thank you for the opportunity. So yeah, on Monday night, most Monday nights, we have the formative chat, 7:30 Eastern, 7:30 p.m. Eastern. And then, on Twitter or X or Threads and Instagram, RDENE915. I'm on LinkedIn. And, I've been doing a newsletter, sending out information. It's on my blog site, which is you put the www in the rdene915.com. And I'm always looking for guest bloggers. So if somebody is thinking, hey, maybe I will try blogging, but I don't know where to put the blog, like send it my way. I would love to share your story. And as some things coming up, doing some writing and some conferences and presentations on AI, which is a super exciting area that I've loved working in for the last couple of years. But there are some free professional learning events that are great opportunities for other educators to connect and to dive into a topic that you might be thinking, yeah, I don't know if I can do that. And you never know. You just got to take that risk and try something out. So I think that's pretty much, you can find me in all those spaces. So
Well, I'll do my best to post links to all of those with this
thanks.
video. Thanks so much for your time. Thank you, Rachelle, and have
Thank
a great
you.
day.